What do atheists, at least Anglophone atheists, American atheists, let's call them, what do American atheists, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Mormons have in common? They all believe that the Bible was sent down by God. The Mormons at least believe that the Bible has errors in it. Unsubstantiated, their claim may be, because they claim that the Book of Mormon is the most perfect book, even though it has a lot of anachronistic stuff in it, like 1,000 years before Columbus. They talk about there being wheat and cattle and horses and sheep and goats and barley, and wide use of bronze and the spoked wheel, and chainmail. And, steel swords and stuff like that. They're sexual Puritans. Most of them are. There are Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and some atheists that aren't. And they're proselytizers. Now, Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox do not proselytize, right? We may evangelize, meaning gospelize, like live out the gospel, donate to reputable charitable organizations, help our fellow man, wear holy medals, baptismal medals, to bear witness that we are part of the Mother Church, and try to help people in need, but we don't actively try to convert people, right? The evangelicals of all stripe, the fundamentalists, the evangelicals that are a denomination of Protestantism, the proselytizers of the Presbyterians, the Messianic Jews for Jesus groups, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Mormons are all proselytizers. And atheists, they have this stuff called, I think it's called street epistemology or something like that, where they haven't changed a bit of their thinking. They're not as critical. I mean, they're not any more critical of their lifestyle, of views, anything. They've just gone one God less, and they proselytize. And I actually saw one of them doing this. I mean, there's videos up on YouTube of them doing this, but I actually saw one of them and got into it with them. And also all of these groups seem to have an aggressive ignorance when it comes towards Constantine and the compilation of the canon of Scripture, as well as Nicea. Constantine made the Empire Christian. No, he didn't. That was Theodosius 80 years later, 8 years after Constantine had died. Nearly 100 since he took power. Since Constantine the Great took power. Constantine had all the other Gospels burned. No. Constantine had a hand in the formation of the canon of Scripture. No. The 50 Bibles, the 50 bound codices that he had made contain different books of the Bible. Whoever, he sent them out and said, put the Christian scriptures in these. And we have a few examples of them, like Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, and Alexandrius might be one of them. And they have things like the Epistle of Barnabas, the Shepherd Hermas, part of the Didache, the Didasilica. They say Shepherd Hermas, First Clement, things like that, and they'll be missing things like 3rd John or 2nd Peter. But they'll have the Homilogomena in there, and it's mainly just all New Testament stuff. Or that Christianity, suppressed paganism or pagan beliefs. No. Or that when the world became Christian, that's when the Dark Ages happened. Dark Ages happened because the world became less Christian. Pagan barbarians invaded, destroyed civilization, and the only light that stood out was in Constantinople and the areas which the Byzantine Empire controlled, and in a very strange place in the monasteries in Ireland, which was never part of the Roman Empire and which was not converted by the sword. There was a religion that did come up that would swallow up 3/4 of Christendom, and it spread by the sword, and it would come out of the Middle East. And I think you all know what I'm talking about. But what does the Bible being inspired by God mean? Because the song Amazing Grace was divinely inspired. A man was on a slave ship in the Middle Passage and in a horrible storm about to go down, and he prayed to God and he said, God, I will change my life if you spare my life. And he did. And from there he was inspired to write the song Amazing Grace. And he worked tirelessly the rest of his life to end slavery. The I Have a Dream speech was inspired by Christianity as well as the maltreatment of Black Americans. That's what inspired Martin Luther King to write that speech, which is really a sermon or a homily, but speech, as we remember it as. David Berkowitz, known as the Son of Sam Killer, was inspired by a barking dog to go out and murder people. Inspired by and dictation are two different things. This is not inspired by God, nor was it ever claimed to be. It's dictation. The official story is that God had the angel Gabriel, or Jibrail, whisper into Muhammad's ear, and Muhammad would know this and recite it, and he'd have his followers recite what he had just said, which was a recitation of what Jibrail, the angel Gabriel, said, which was directly from God. And then after the death of this man who held the title as Muhammad, his actual name Abu al-Qasim, usually called Kuthum, they wrote it down on shoulder bones of oxen and palm leaves and everything, and then finally they had it all brought together and put together in the book called the Quran, or the Recitations. This is the Pentateuch of the Jews, and then you have some of their prophets and a court chronicle, and that makes up the Tanakh, or the Old Testament. Except in this version, what gets called the Old Testament is actually the Septuagint. Same with this one, because they're Catholic. This is the Protestant I'm talking about. This is from the Masoretic text tradition and the Jewish tradition. And then we get to the New Testament, and we have the Gospel according to Matthew, the Gospel according to Mark, the Gospel according to John, the Gospel according to Luke. And two of them say we couldn't contain all the stories here. John actually ends with saying, look, I only put a few, very little in here, because if I were to write everything down that I experienced with the man over the years, and I think it's everywhere, the Synoptic Gospels portray Christ coming and being with the apostles and the other disciples for about a year. John makes it seem like 3 years. But John says, look, I can, if I were to sit down and write about every little thing, here it goes. This is how the Gospel of John ends. This is the disciple who is testifying to these things, and wrote these things, that we know that that his testimony is true. And there are so many other things which Jesus did, which if were written in detail, I suppose even the world itself would not contain the books that would be written. We also have extra canonical stuff that's not necessarily heretical. We also have stuff that Pius had mentioned. But yeah, so these are accounts by different people, and the people who liked Matthew as a gospel, and there were a lot of them, probably didn't like John, the Gospel of John, nor did they probably really care that much for Luke. Luke was probably written in protest to Matthew, because it's using Mark as a template and drawing from Q as well, because it sees Matthew as heavily Judaizing Mark and basically bastardizing its message. But these are four independent things, and the proselytizing fundamentalist anti-theists, as well as the proselytizing, evangelizing fundamentalist Protestant, view the Bible as basically dictation, and believe inspired by God means God meant to have every jot and tittle written down in such a way, that it's almost like whispering into the writer's ear, like it's the Quran. That's the problem with atheism, at least these days, is that it's just evangelical proselytizing Christianity gone one God less.